uh, clients or families and men that I work with who are excited about the prospects of having a baby. They're super excited. Yeah, I'm having a new little one. I can't wait to do this. I can't wait. I can't wait to take part in this phase. I can't wait to take part in that phase. And they receive messaging from community, even family members, who say like, you aren't pregnant, like you aren't going through anything. It's your partner who's going through it, right? And so, and that's a significant interaction, because right there we're already starting to sow the seeds that this gentleman's place in the birthing process is insignificant outside of helping to create the child and then helping to pay for and discipline the child after the child is born, right? Those messages come from our family, not to mention the messages that we get from healthcare providers, home visiting nurses, doctors, so on and so forth. That when we have men going on these prenatal visits and sitting in the doctor's offices with their partner, the doctors will do everything possible to ignore the fact that the father's in the space. They will talk over them, they will talk around them, they will talk through them, but they will never talk to them. All the eye contact, everything is usually directed straight towards the mother. And so we're already starting to build this subconscious messaging and this foundation of, again, you're insignificant in this space. You don't matter in this at this point in time, and you don't play a significant role in this. Why? And so the question then becomes, why do you not see many men retort or kind of push back in these situations? Well, the answer is we've been conditioned to do that since we were little kids, because a birthing space isn't seen as a masculine space, which we equate with being strong, and feminine spaces we equate with being like weak. We are told that it's unsafe to dwell in a space that is not masculine or strong. That messaging starts to come to us at a very young age. From how many times have we seen little boys and little girls both fall, hit their head, get scrapes, so on and so forth? What do we usually tell the little girl? We usually go, we comfort her, we brush off her scrapes, we put ice pack on her head, we talk to her, right? We actually process her feelings, we process her emotions. What do we tell our little boys? Brush it off, get over it, suck it up. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, you're okay, you're good. And it might not be a huge incident. It might not be a big welt, might not be a big scratch, but what we're doing right there at those very moments we're ignoring the fact that that young man is having emotions and experiencing some emotions with the incident that just happened. So it's bigger than the incident. It's not about the physical pain. It's about the emotions and stuff and how they view themselves in the space that come along with that. And I always tell people that my dad always has a saying. He says, son, there's two things in life that are undefeated: time and nature. So don't waste time, and always respect nature. The reason this is significant is we spend so much time teaching little boys to ignore their feelings and not process their feelings, that when they become grown men and they experience these feelings, a lot of them either expend a lot of energy holding them in, being closed off, emotionally unavailable to their partners, to themselves, or when those emotions come out, they're often uncontrollable. They don't understand it, and they find themselves in compromising situations, i.e., huge fits of anger that become dangerous or violent, which get themselves in trouble. Because whatever anybody who's involved in early childhood development will tell you is human beings, or children especially, have to go through every stage of that development, every stage in life, right? So if you're denying a young man the ability to to go through and accept that emotional phase of his life and process that properly, it's going to express itself later on, one way or the other.
I have a question, comment. I don't want to cut you off because I love what
Yeah,
you're
go ahead.
saying, but I want to contribute and kind of help you in what you're saying here too, because in the last several years, I've done a deep dive into the nervous system and brain health and development through the human lifespan. And that part of what you're speaking to is that our emotional regulating, impulse control, critical thinking, mature brain isn't fully developed until our mid-20s. So as we're
Right.
kids, we're just driven by our unconscious nervous system and our emotions. And when we are taught to fear our emotions, we're taught to be afraid to feel that way, to be afraid to express them, to be afraid of being punished or not being strong enough, or whatever the fear messages we're hearing as men, to not express those feelings, that those are weak, that you have to somehow regulate them when we don't have the ability to regulate them. Our brains aren't developed that way yet. All it does is embeds in your nervous system to be afraid of emotion. And you grow with that fear, and that manifests in everything that you're talking about. And so without that awareness of how the brain and nervous system even develop, we just cultivate this toxic system that is continuing, that's perpetuated.
Absolutely. And so I always tell um, clients that I'm working with, like a lot of times, like especially in a lot of cases, like the female partner in the family that I'm working with, like you need to understand that a lot of males in their 20s and sometimes mid to late 30s, we're on our training wheels of emotions, and that's not meant to disrespect where we are as men and our development, anything. It's just simply put, like what Scott was saying, like we haven't been taught, or it hasn't been made acceptable for us to process those emotions. And so a lot of us don't start to allow ourselves to experience and be exposed to that to later in age, where we quite frankly aren't very equipped or confident in our ability to express them or even communicate and articulate those to our partner, which is a very important thing, especially when we're talking about the birth process, being able to have conversations about co-parenting and what people's roles are before the baby is born, and then also postpartum, right? And then exactly what we was talking about, like you become afraid of that, right? And when you are faced with fear, what do we do? Fight, flight, or freeze, right? So we either argue, we strike out against those who we see as maybe taking advantage of our emotions, whether they're doing it, taking advantage or not. We perceive it that way. Whether we are afraid of what that emotion may look like, we're making assumptions ourselves of how vulnerable it makes us look, or our misunderstanding of it. So that's how we often, respond in those situations. Also, we have to look at, as in the realm of birth work, we have to look at the other forms of subconscious messaging that we're giving to little boys and we're giving to men in general, right? One of the things that really bothers me as a birth worker is when we talk about, making sure that our families have all the resources and things that they need to succeed. We always want to link them to different resources to help them in different phases of the birthing process. It always bothers me that when we're trying to link them with different resources that say that are family resources, that when you read the fine print or you go into the facility or you look at what they provide, those quote unquote family resources are only directed to mom and child. Well, again, what message does that send to our fathers? It sends a message that, again, you are not a valuable or seen part of this process, right? And so again, men are receiving subconscious messaging that, like, there's really no place for you here, right? There's really no place for you here at all. But we even look at resources that may even be available for men, such as WIC. But there's a lot of men, much less, and there's also a lot of even providers, home visiting nurses that aren't even aware that WIC is actually available for men to even utilize. And this is important because there's actually a growing number of men as a primary caretaker for their children. They're the one who have primary custody, even though they co-parent with the mom. And so they may need resources. They don't even know that they can access WIC because the name of it is Women's Infants and Children, right? Again, that messaging, what message is that delivering to our fathers? Again, every time they turn around and look, there's a message ever since you're younger that you can't be vulnerable. There's no resources for you. You can't receive, like, there's no help for you. You have to do this by yourself. But again, the conversation is always in a lot of our spaces that get to you really quick. The conversation is always in these spaces that, why don't men care more about their health? Why shouldn't we What do we do to get men to care more about their health? Why aren't men taking advantage of, going to take, getting their physicals, getting annual checkups, going to doctors? Again, think about just some of the few things that I've laid out and the messaging that we're delivering to men about where they fit in our everyday society. Yes, Brady.
Yeah, I was just wondering, could you talk a little bit more about what WIC is? I'm not very familiar with that resource.
Yeah, so it's a resource often given to people who qualify or families who qualify, that can help you like subsidize, food, groceries, different resources like that. Milk formula for babies if you have newborns. So it's federal. It's basically federal aid given to families who need assistance.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that answers my question. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. And if you have anything else, please feel free to chime in. But like, yeah, as I was saying, like continuously, we're giving these messages to men. Can't be vulnerable, can't express emotion, we can't process emotion. When you are in a position of when you're expected to lead, and again, in our society, one of the main frameworks that we do to label men or tell what their position is that of the leader, that of the protector, and that of someone who has to have all the answers. Right now, we're just getting started. I've already laid out several different occasions several different occasions where all of that is nullified, right? We don't allow them, in the space. And so it always amazes me, not that it amazes me, but it always makes sense to me when um, I'm sitting with a couple and, you know, they're having issues with co-parenting or they're mediating and mom is, talking about, I know the family history, and mama's always talking about, when problems arise or problems kind of come up, dad is either unavailable, doesn't want to argue, he becomes emotionally unavailable, or he strikes out in anger. And I always shake my head and I go, that makes sense. And she's like, well, what do you mean it makes sense? And I said, again, we go back to men are on their emotional training wheels at this age. I was like, in one particular occasion, I saw how the family interacted with the son. I said, your son there's a great chance your son might be the same way. She's like, what do you mean? I said, every time that I've seen him been in an uncomfortable situation or upset about something, you dismiss him or you tell him to be quiet. You don't process with him why he's upset. You don't process with him why he's uncomfortable. You tell him to brush it off. I said, the conversations we've had, you just told me that your partner's history is that of having to be the quote unquote man of the house. Well, what's wrong with being the man of the house? Being the man of the house at a young age means that I'm asking you to give up that early childhood stage, that stage of development that allows you to walk in the world being at an age appropriate a manner, and being able to express yourself and have the experiences of children, every day in your age group. And I've asked him to step into a role of being an adult and not be able to process things. So no, it's not a mystery to me that he can't handle conflict with you in a mature manner, and he either runs away or he's quick to anger with that. That makes total sense. And so I explained to her, now you have a choice to make. It is absolutely not your responsibility to help him on his journey. He's only going to be able to remedy that himself, to get help with that, and improve himself when he's ready and when he wants to. But you have to realize if you intend to be with him, you have to be patient, understand that this is part of the process. And it seemed to really help bring, more understanding to her. I had another incident where a young woman was talking a lot about her daughter's father and saying, men are trash, I can't stand men this, that, and other. I let her vent for like 10 minutes because I understand that comes from a place of trauma, and it's not my responsibility to tell somebody how to handle their trauma. But after about 10 minutes, I felt the need to come out and say something because there were young men in the room, also young women in the room, and there were other mothers who were starting to kind of co-sign the behavior. And I told her, I said, ma'am, I said, I need to cut you off right here. I said, I actually know your daughter's father. I said, I actually used to tutor him when he was younger. And I know other people who know him. We actually know him so much and so well to say that everything that you're saying about him is true. I said, so that leads me to one conclusion. Are all men trash, or is your decision making bad? Because if we know this about him to be of his behavior to be true, that lets me know that he didn't hide anything about who he was, and yet you still chose to be with him and have a child. Then why was this important? Not to shame her, not to call her out, because she's actually a great mother, and I let her know that. But the reason that is important is because when you have little young men in that room, what message are you delivering to those young men? I then began to ask the other women in the room, is your son trash? Well, no, my son's not. I raised my son this way, that way. I do this, I do that with my son. Exactly. All these other men that you're talking about are somebody else's son, right? And so I could always go so long about this. I actually got so much more I got to say, but I know I'm running on the time limit. Where does this all come back to? I've laid out the different scenarios of how messaging is delivered to men about how they don't matter, how they can't be vulnerable, how they're unable to process emotions and things like that. If we're giving this message to men consistently and deliberately at such a very young age, it's no wonder that when you ask them to put themselves in a vulnerable position, to see a physician, to look over them and see if something is wrong, that they are unwilling to do that. It's no wonder that when men are dealing with a lot of pressure, dealing with a lot of emotional and mental issues that they're unable to process and unable to deal with, that they're reluctant to go take care of their mental health and see a practitioner to talk these things out. Because again, being vulnerable means that they're weak, right? Also, like going to these practitioners and stuff like that, they're being told that that's not even important to begin with, right? And so I heard the saying, beware when the strong man tells you that he's tired, because that's his way of saying that he needs help and that he's at his limit. And so I tried my best, because I have these type of conversations all along a lot, to condense it into this short time frame and try to hit some of the main points for you all so that we can have open dialogue about it. But I say that to say, like, the takeaways that I want people to go with for those of you who are in men's health, concerned about men's health, and want men to be more conscious of their health, is the takeaways I want you to do is, like, what is your messaging like to men and boys? And what foundations do you lay to make men feel more comfortable exploring their emotions and exploring their physical health and their vulnerability in spaces? Are you consistent with that message, right? And that foundation? And who or what is your messenger? Who or what is your messenger? Because we also have to think about, like, appropriateness, right? Cultural appropriateness, right? If you are trying to appeal to a demographic of men that isn't into hunting or something like that, then you don't plan an engagement project for men around going out in the woods hiking and hunting. If you are planning to engage a group of men who love to go fishing, then you don't plan an engagement project built around going to the art museum if that demographic of men isn't interested in that. And so those are the main takeaways that I think folks should, walk away with this. If you're thinking about getting into men's health, really having a positive impact as far as getting men to care more about their health and be more engaged in that. Like, think about those things, those main factors. Who are you interacting with? Who's the messenger? What foundation is there, and what does your messaging look like? Because you need to recognize that you are also combating messaging that they have been receiving that is counterproductive to your goal since the day that they were born.